My name is Mark Harris, and I'm pastor of the First Baptist Church of Charlotte. I'm running for United States Senate in 2014, and this is my first time running for public office. Well, I serve as pastor and have served as a pastor of a local church for the last 24 and a half years. Actually 26 years in ministry. The first year and a half were in youth ministry, but for the last 24 and a half have served as a senior pastor. It's something that I felt called in my life to do, and I was actually through college, really high school and college, thought I was going to go into public policy, major in political science, was headed to law school, and was getting married in the summer of '87, and 2 weeks before my wedding and 2 months before I was to start law school at Campbell University School of Law, where I'd been accepted in February of that year, God called me to preach. And so I headed to Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary in Wake Forest, North Carolina, and I completed my Master's of Divinity and my Doctor of Ministry degree there. Well, our family is just the joy of my life, and my wife Beth and I have been married now 26 and a half years. We've been blessed with 3 beautiful children who are all practically grown now. Our oldest is a teacher and is in her 4th year of teaching in Union County, North Carolina. Our second child, John, just got married back in May of this year, and he's a second-year law student at UNC Law School. And our youngest, Matthew, is a senior at Wake Forest University in the School of Business, and will graduate in May. And when we're just very, very blessed, and really throughout our lives, it has been an incredible blessing just to watch our children grow up, to be active and involved with them, and just to watch their lives blossom. Well, I was born and raised in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, right here, and what a joy it was growing up in Winston-Salem. My mom taught kindergarten, and my dad was a supervisor of production planning at Container Corporation of America, where they make corrugated boxes. And growing up was a joy. I went to public school here. I went to Spee School. I went to Cook. I went to Jefferson. Went to Mount Tabor. Went to Reynolds. A whole series of schools in those days. But it was a real joy, and all kind of lessons. And I think back, I'm the baby of 5 children. And so coming up in a large family, you have a way of learning valuable lessons. And I looked at my mom and dad, and I look at the life that they lived. And I lost my mom last year, and had she lived to December, mom and dad would have been married 65 years. And what a great testimony that they have been to me and to my family. And so watching them grow up, I think I learned a lot of things about hard work. I learned a lot of things about sacrifice. I learned a lot of things about taking risks. As a young man, they dropped me off 3 days a week as a 14-year-old at the American for Reagan's office over on Healy Drive in Winston-Salem. I stuffed envelopes and made phone calls. And as a result of that, I had the privilege of going to the inauguration in 1981 of Ronald Reagan as president. And, you know, it was even during that childhood phase, I learned something about American politics that today is really implanted in my heart. And that is that Reagan taught us that American politics really is about building a 3-legged stool, that you've got to have a strong domestic agenda, you got to have a strong foreign policy, and you've got to have strong traditional values. And if you try to weaken or break off any one of those 3 legs, that stool cannot stand. That was implanted in my mind and in my heart, and definitely affects the way I come to American politics. Well, Chris, I think there's, in my heart and in my mind, having really walked through life with people for the last 24 and a half years, that's one of the things you do as a pastor. And I have the privilege of walking with them through their tough times, walking with them through their successes. And it doesn't matter what congregation I've had the privilege of pastoring. The concerns that I heard even as a young pastor 24 years ago are the concerns that I hear still today, but with greater intensity than ever before. People are concerned. They're concerned about a sluggish economy. They're concerned about eroding values. They're concerned about a federal government that is continuing to encroach into our daily lives. And when I look at all of those together, I see an incredible lack of leadership. And that's what has inspired me and encouraged me to step into this race. I got involved in leadership in the marriage amendment here in North Carolina, and crisscrossed this state for over a year, involved in that campaign. And I heard from people even during that time just the desperate need of leadership in our country once again. And so I feel like that there's a skill set of values and leadership that I bring to the table that could represent North Carolina in the United States Senate. Well, I think the ultimate solution to Obamacare is going to be repeal it. I think until we have leaders that are willing to step up and recognize literally the train wreck that this really is, then we've got some serious issues. I mean, when you see your own Congressional Budget Office saying that by 2023, in 10 years, we're going to be spending $3 trillion on health care in this country, and you put that in perspective with the fact that $3.5 trillion is what we spend totally now, then you've got a serious problem. And I think when you look at people like Ted Cruz and Mike Lee and others that were standing so strong, what they were saying to the American people is, we can't just capitulate. We can't just say, well, let's let it fall on its face, because you and I know that any government program that is put in place, once it's given, it's hard to take it back. And so keeping it front and center, I think, was indeed one of the strategies that was being employed. Now, I've said this during the shutdown in interviews, and that is that I really think that I found two people in America, maybe the only two men that could unite the Republican Party, and that was Barack Obama and Harry Reid. Because regardless of the strategies, and we had different views on the strategy to use, some said, let's defund Obamacare, and that went through the House and got to the Senate. Harry Reid and Barack Obama said no. Then there were those that said, well, let's delay Obamacare. The House took the stand. They voted on the issue. It went to the Senate. Harry Reid, Barack Obama said, we won't even discuss it. Then they said, well, okay, Obamacare is going to be a reality. Let's at least make it fair for everybody and do away with all the exemptions that you're going to give here. And again, Harry Reid and Barack Obama said no. They just stonewalled every part of that, which, by the way, I do think when the history books are written, this government shutdown will be placed at the feet of Harry Reid and Barack Obama, because any thinking person sees the path that we traveled through that. But I really believe that the ultimate solution to Obamacare is going to be to repeal it. Republicans have got to come with our plan to the table and do a better job of communicating. We do have issues with health care in this country. There's serious issues, but the answer is not the government takeover. The answer is that Republicans need the message that we need to be doing things more like that are free market driven. We need to be saying, hey, let's expand our health savings accounts and come up with ways of creating that environment. Let's again, free market driven. Let's say that people could buy their health insurance across state lines. Let's say that we have some serious tort reform and put an end to these lawsuits that continue to drive up our medical expenses every year in this country. There are real solutions that have been introduced and need to be introduced, but we need to do a better job as Republicans of communicating that and putting that message out there. Well, I don't think we need any more gun regulation. I think we have plenty of gun regulation in place now. I think our federal government and the leaders that are there now, which I believe show a lack of leadership, really are doing the things they're doing based on being reactive rather than anything else, and really not looking at the serious problems that we have in this country. And I think guns tend to always be the scapegoat. And I think that's ridiculous. I mean, I've said many times, if you look at the mass shootings and the tragedies we've had in this country, and they are really tragedies, and we have to learn as leaders to help our country walk through tragedies without using them to make political hay to take advantage of something and make guns the scapegoat. If you look at the real issue of the tragedies of whether it be Aurora, Colorado, or whether it be what happened in Newtown, Connecticut, or whether it be what happened at the Naval Yards, the three things that all of those incidents had in common was a mental illness, was violence coming out of the entertainment industry based on video games and movies, and number three was the breakdown of the family. None of those are being addressed by the lack of leadership going on in Washington, D.C., but rather they would rather take on an issue like, we need more gun regulation. We need to do something to somehow prove that we have a reason to exist. That's disastrous. That's not leadership, and that's what needs to be replaced in Washington. I think we've got to do a couple of things, and the first is the most practical, and that is we've got to put spending controls in place. You're not going to solve the debt limit issue until we recognize we have a serious spending problem in this country. Now, the only way you're going to be able to really deal with a spending problem is the second part, and that is we've got to educate the American people on the fact that we cannot sustain every so often continuing to raise this debt limit. We just can't do it. It's going to be disastrous for our economy. It strangles the economy. It leaves everybody in this period of indecision, not really knowing what the future holds because it is so looming over the American economy. So I think we've got to have spending controls and we've got to deal with it in that way. But I think we've got to educate the American people. Kind of goes back to something we said earlier about things you learned in your childhood, and as that 14-year-old working at Americans for Reagan office. One thing that Reagan brought to the table that I feel like we're missing in American politics today is he not only was a great communicator, he was a teacher. And when he spoke, he taught the American people. We've got a president today that lectures the American people on how bad we are, or lectures Congress on how much they failed. And rather than teaching and dealing with issues head on and bringing the American people along to understand that we can't continue on this path that we're traveling. And I think both of those are critical. Control spending, but we've got to educate and communicate to the American people how and why we're going to do it.
Speaking of some of that spending, Congress is currently at an impasse on the Farm Bill, which has, over the past few years, combined both spending on farm subsidies and the SNAP or food stamp program into one giant omnibus bill. What is your opinion of what should be done about the Farm Bill, and do you support cutting benefits to either farmers or the SNAP program?
Well, I think we need to get a little more transparency in D.C. and instead of jumbling everything together, just like when I think there was a dam that became part of appropriations were made in this whole government reopening experience that we went through. We've got to become more transparent in looking at the realities. And I do believe that we've got to understand that we can't continue. It goes back to the debt ceiling. We can't continue in this welfare program of unlimited spending that continues to grow. It's got to be reduced. And oftentimes I'm asked, you know, how do you feel like we got in this situation, and how are we ever going to get away from it? And I do think that's what I bring to this race that is a unique position on this is I realize if you look back a generation ago, there was a time in this nation where the church had a certain spiritual authority and really demonstrated an authority in this country. Well, not to preach, but Jesus teaches us in the Bible that all authority comes through service. It always has. And if you look historically at our nation, you look at our orphanages, you look at our hospitals, you look at our schools, you look at our universities, you look at our rescue missions, you look at our soup kitchen, you look at all of those things. Those were entities started by the church that were serving people in this country. Somewhere along the line, the government figured out that the loyalty of the people was tied to service. Therefore, if the government steps in and provides all these things, then the loyalty of the people would be to the government. And what happened, in my humble opinion, is the government stepped in and the church and many ministries stepped back. And when they did, We have watched now for a generation that the government has become stronger and stronger in their authority over the people. And that's a dangerous situation. And I feel like the solution ultimately to this whole, the welfare issue, the SNAP program, all of those, government's going to have to step back and once again begin to slowly turn that spigot back. Now, you're not going to do it automatically. You're not going to turn the spigot off, but we must begin to turn that spigot back of what the government is putting into these programs and allow the churches and the nonprofits and the other ministries to step up again and really meet the needs, legitimate needs of people that they have in this culture. And I think that's going to be the key, is working together in that way.
President Obama was going to ask Congress for a War Resolution Act against Syria because of the use of chemical weapons there. That was eventually derailed because of a Russian plan that, a lot of people have some problems with. But as it relates to what you would have done in the Senate, were you a senator at the time and that War Resolution Act were to come across your desk, would you have voted for it? And what do you think about the current foreign policy of America right now?
Well, to give a brief answer first, I would not have supported firing missiles into Syria at that moment. I feel like that the information we had, even on the civil war, that was really at the end of the day what is going on in Syria is a civil war, and for our involvement in that, I did not see the wisdom for that at that point. In your broader question, I think is the real important issue. We have sat by and watched this president almost single-handedly destroy the reputation of America on the world stage. It's concerning to me when we have a president that has left us in a place where our allies don't really know that we have their backs. Our enemies seem to be making a mockery, and this whole philosophy of a foreign policy of lead from behind, we need to wake up and realize that bottom line, we have a president that has just failed to lead. And actually, I say single-handedly he's done this, almost single-handedly, because the Democrats in the United States Senate, who control the Senate and who play a major part in our foreign relations and our foreign policy, have sat by and watched this happen. If I end up in the United States Senate, I will not sit idly by and watch America's reputation on the world stage be damaged like we have watched. Well, I do think when you look at the issue of drones, I do think it's really as much a foreign policy, or should be, as anything. I think there's two things that are critical on this question. One is, are the use of drones a matter of national security? If they are, then we need to take that into account. We've been blessed with the technology. I think we need to use it. But I also recognize that we need to look at the fact that it has to be done within the boundary of the law. That's the second aspect that must be understood. So, when I look at the issue, it does really come back to leadership, and that is the people that we have in leadership. If they are people that understand the gift of the technology but are responsible with it, then that's great. But if you have people that tend to operate in gray areas and tend to take advantage and tend to even violate the Constitution, then you've got a more serious issue that must be considered. And I'm very grateful for Senator Paul raising the question. Well, I think, if you really look at it from the greatest abstract position of government, government exists to more or less secure the God-given rights that we have as human beings. That's why it exists. When you look at our country and you recognize even in our Constitution and you think about the preamble of we the people in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare. When you look at those issues, government does have a role in our lives, but it all is centered around, at the end of the day, we the people, that they're the ones who control government. And when it flips, you've got a serious situation that becomes very dangerous.
The primary criticism I've heard about your candidacy is that by entering the race at this point, you are primarily serving as a spoiler to other grassroots candidates that are already out there, and could ultimately lead to a quote-unquote establishment candidate being elected. What is your response to that criticism?
Well, first of all, I would say that that's certainly not true, that it's not my purpose to be in this race to be a spoiler in any way, shape, or form. For me to get into this race has been a process in every way, Chris. I go back to when I was first challenged and encouraged by someone, had I ever considered myself being a candidate, which goes back to September of 2012. And some things transpired in our own family of losing my mom in October that sort of threw us into a tailspin. And it was really January of this year when my wife and I began to genuinely pray about, is this something that we were called to do? We sought the counsel of a lot of people, spiritual people that I felt had a lot more experience in this realm than I had. And so it was a serious process. And I realized even through this process that it was something that I was feeling led to do, and a decision that I was being led to make. People talk about, well, you're getting in late, so you're just a spoiler. Well, the truth is that I'm getting in at this point in late September, early October into this race because I'm not independently wealthy. A lot of people that run for U.S. Senate are independently wealthy, and they'll just walk away from their jobs or whatever they're doing to be able to run for office. I don't fall in that category. I don't fall in the category of being a self-funder that can write checks. I've been a pastor, for heaven's sake, for the last 24 and a half years. So I'm in this race in the timing because we wanted to make sure it is the right timing and that it was the right thing for me to do. And so I'm in it not to make a statement. I'm in it not to shift the conversation, because I have the glorious privilege of making a statement every Sunday morning at 301 South Davidson Street in the pulpit of First Baptist Charlotte. I have the privilege of shifting the conversation every week when I step into that pulpit. I'm in this to win because I believe there is a lack of leadership in Washington, D.C., and I genuinely believe that I can beat Kay Hagan. And I believe at the end of the day, that's what all of us desire, and that is a candidate who will beat Kay Hagan in November. Well, I just appreciate the opportunity to be able to even share through this venue of the opportunity to be a candidate for the United States Senate. As I said a moment ago, I'm in this race because I believe that I've been led to be in this race, and I believe that there's a lack of leadership in Washington, D.C., that I bring to the table leadership experience. I bring to the table 24 and a half years of serving and walking through life with people. In fact, folks have asked me from time to time, as a pastor, what really qualifies you to be in the United States Senate? And I said, well, I think I would narrow that down to this. When you do the pathology report of America today, and you talk about all of the diseases we face, whether you want to talk about addictions, whether you want to talk about unemployment, whether you want to talk about poverty, whether you want to talk about crime, whether you want to talk about the breakdown of the family, any of those diseases that we all realize weaken our country. As a pastor for 24 and a half years, I can put names and faces with every one of those diseases. I believe we need a United States Senator in Washington, D.C., that will be a North Carolina voice for North Carolina values, and I can be that man. I believe I can beat Kay Hagan because I provide an incredible contrast to the vision I have for America and the vision that she has for America. And that's what we need in November of 2014.